everyone. FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here for ChessLecture.com, and we continue our little series looking at some disasters from the recently completed World Blitz Championship in Dubai. So last time we looked at 4 games where white won very quickly. This time we're going to take a look at 3 games where it's black who wins rather speedily. The first one was played between the young Egyptian Grandmaster Bassem Amin and former world champion, and possibly, although probably unlikely, future world champion Viswanathan Anand. So Amin had white, and let's take a look. So e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and g3. So trying to avoid a theoretical confrontation with Anand, knight c6, bishop g2, g6, castles, bishop g7, c3. So we've got King's Indian attack going here. White aims to play d4, obviously enough. And black has a number of things that he can do that are reasonable against this. He played knight f6, maybe e5, going for a kind of Bottonic English plan with colors reversed, or something analogous to it, is one reasonable idea. Another reasonable idea is to play bishop to g4, aiming to impede d4. Now, it does mean surrendering the bishop here, which many top grandmasters especially don't like to do, but on the other hand, it's kind of thematic with respect to the rest of his army. So you can see this guy's controlling a dark square, this guy's controlling a dark square, this guy's on the long diagonal, the knight covers c6, or covers d4 and e5, and after e6 and knight e7, that knight's ready to help the other one out too. So it's a reasonable idea, but okay, there are multiple reasonable ways to proceed. So knight f6, and this seems to stop d4, but it doesn't really. d4, and the point is that knight takes e4 is a kind of a standard trick. I mean, it's known from some similar positions. White plays d5, and when this guy moves, there's queen a4 check, and black would lose the knight. So be aware of that little tactic. As I said, it does appear in a number of variations. So after d4, again, bishop to g4 is possible, but Anand castled. And I'm not sure I really like this so well. I think after d5, knight a5, rook e1, white is a bit better. I mean, the knight on a5 is not brilliantly placed. And for that matter, it's not really fantastically easy to get it to be well placed either. So it's both bad and not easily repaired. So black played b5, giving us something that looks like a cross between a King's Indian and a Ruy Lopez with, well, at least those 2 openings, maybe a bit of a Benoni thrown in as well. Anyway, I think after knight to a3, white would enjoy a slight edge. I mean, if black plays a6, then this knight can come back with can come back into play via c2. Also, at some point, e5 is going to be strong. So I think knight a3 would have been useful to play. Also because it stops knight to c4, so it takes that square under control. So instead, though, Amin played e5 straight away, and he is trying to provoke a tactical crisis quickly. And one lesson, I suppose, is that if you see some tactical sequence that looks promising, but that your opponent probably sees as well, if your opponent is stronger than you are, you should be at least very suspicious. So I think Amin was a bit naive in his play in this game. All right. Well, here Anand played knight to e8. I think maybe knight to g4 might be a little bit better, but knight e8 is good enough. Again, I think white should play knight to a3 before he engages in anything else. In the game, he played a4, but now black plays b4, and this takes away knight a3, and also keeps the c4 square available to the knight. Also, perhaps this bishop may come to a6 at some moment as well. So I think black has gained from this a4, b4 exchange. So takes, and now, again, Amin goes really to try to just crush black, to kind of strangle the baby in its crib. But it doesn't work. So bishop to g5, takes, f6, d6. All right, so it's very complicated looking. White has both of these guys under attack, but DE as well. It's not threatened here because his queen is hanging, but in some positions it might be a threat. Also, what is a threat is bishop a8, Also, maybe a queen or a bishop going to d5, check to block this line, so there's no queen takes d1, and then d takes e7, although bishop d5 check, e6. So all kinds of crazy things are going on here. And, well, black's next move, though, is fairly easy. So he just plays knight takes d6, collecting a pawn while simultaneously removing all the arrows from the board. All right, joking there. Now, white has various interesting-looking options. There's bishop a8, there's bishop h6, there's queen d5 check, and then queen takes a5. So what do? Well, here, probably the best thing to do, although it's unfortunately not fantastic, is bishop a8. And after f takes e5, okay, it's not entirely clear, but black is a little bit better here. He's up a pawn, not a great pawn, but it is a pawn, and he's ahead in development. White's queen side is kind of stillborn, and to some extent there's a bit of a lack of coordination amongst white's pieces. This is what Amin should have played, but again, he tried to kind of ramp things up with bishop h6, and this was a big mistake. So here, f takes e5, bishop takes a8, and now knight f7 with a big oops. So he threatens the queen, and he threatens the bishop, and if queen takes d8, rook takes d8, bishop e3, then black has, well, he can play rook to d1 check first, or play knight to b3, rook a2, and then either rook d1 check and rook b1, or bishop f5, which is even better, threatening the bishop and threatening to win the house with bishop takes b1. So white cannot do that, and he recognized that. So after knight f7, he played bishop to d5, and here he got a little bit of a break, but it's very complicated. Bishop to b7 is, in fact, the very best move, but it's tricky, and I'll refer you to the PGN for more on that. Instead, Anand played rook to e8, which is a good move, but not the very best. Still, after bishop f7, king f7, black is clearly better for the familiar reasons. Extra pawn, lead in development, and white's very, very clumsy queen side. But again, Amin just decided that he couldn't bear this position as it was, tried to make something happen with queen to f3, and he did make something happen. He lost in two moves, e6, and now it's a simple double attack. This guy and this guy are both loose, and they can't both be saved. Bishop e4, knight h6, and he resigned. All right, so what are the lessons here? Well, I already mentioned one. When you're playing someone who is known to be a very strong tactician, someone that you ought to believe is a better tactician than you are, you should be exceedingly careful in entering some kind of crazy tactical sequence. Now, you do have to trust yourself at the end of the day, but I'm saying that you should be very, very suspicious. The second moral of the story is that you need to cut your losses sometimes. And it's hard, especially in blitz chess, because it's a very energy-laden enterprise. So, you always want to go forward, you're kind of hyped up, it's very exciting, but sometimes you have to just kind of cool your jets, cut your losses, and hang on grimly. And that's really what Amin needed to do here, instead of going to try to make something happen no matter what with queen f3, when e6 was just a very, very simple refutation. He needed to just cut his losses, take on f7, and go from there. All right, let's look at another game here. This one was played, okay, so again, this is from black's perspective here. So black is Gadir Gusenov. He wins this game against the very strong French Grandmaster and sometime Carlsen's second, Laurent Fressinet. So Fressinet is, of course, a terrific player, but in this game, it didn't work out so terrifically. e4, c5, knight f3, g6. So the hyper-accelerated dragon. I think best against this is d4, but okay, c3 is playable. I remember losing a very painful game in this to Dennis Verduga, I think, well, more than 30 years ago, but it wasn't so much the fault of this. But this game follows that game for some time, so it gives me some unpleasant memories. Bishop g7, d4, takes, d5. So black turns this into a modern defense, which is a reasonable option. e5, knight h6, h3. And this is a good move. So the idea for black is that he wants to play bishop to g4, swap, and put knights on f5 and c6. putting lots of pressure on this guy. Also, queen b6, e6 to protect the d5 pawn, castles, and sooner or later f6 happens. And in fact, this is more or less what happened in my game with Verduga, which may be in the databases, may or may not be. I hope it's not, but it might be. At any rate, white played h3, which is a reasonable move to stop bishop to g4. So this guy is kind of the odd man out. It doesn't really have anything to do in this structure, which is why bishop to g4 is very, very logical. Arguably, maybe black should play bishop to g4 here, just to ensure that he can get this in. At any rate, knight h6, h3, castles, knight c3, all very reasonable moves. Bishop f5, bishop e2. Okay, so black has developed the bishop to a reasonably active square, but now the knight on h6 has nothing to do. But what black will do is play bishop to e4, and again try to exchange it off, and then play knight f5. So very logical, and yeah, I mean it's very much in keeping with black's philosophy in this system. Okay, knight c6, castles, bishop to e4. Now, what should white do? I think there are there's more than one good way to play, but I would suggest g4 as a very interesting option, trying to again restrict the knight. So okay, maybe black will get his exchange of his light square bishop for a white knight, but we don't have to allow black's knight to f5. So here, black will probably switch gears and play f6, and okay, this just leads in very different directions. In the game, white played knight to g5, hitting the bishop again. Black played queen in b6, counterattacking the pawn on d4, and if bishop b3, he can take on b2. So white decided instead to take on e4, and took again. But here I think black is better. His pieces are very active, and the e-pawn is under some danger. Also, white's queen's a bit poorly placed. I mean, black is ready to put these rooks on the central files, and he's got to keep the queen safe and keep this bishop protected. And again, he's got to worry about the e5 pawn. So it's a bit clumsy. I mean, I think black has come out ahead here, which is why I think g4 would have been a better option. Even here, perhaps g4 is the way to go, keeping the bishop stuck on g7 because of the need to defend this knight. In the game, white played bishop to c4, trying to be active. Rook a to d8. No threat, but it's an uncomfortable opposition there. So knight to c3, knight h to f5. So now bishop takes e5 is a threat. And white understandably played bishop to f4, but already this is a mistake. And this, well, there's several lessons here. I mean, one is that white failed to keep black's pieces restricted. Secondly, again, when you've got these tactical liabilities, it's very important to try to find some way of alleviating the pressure as quickly as you can. Also, after bishop to f4, we've got another case of loose pieces drop off. So white has two pieces that are unprotected, the bishop on c4 and the bishop on f4. Notice that they're on the same rank. They're both on the fourth rank. So a black piece on the fourth rank, let's say a queen on b4, or maybe a rook on d4, will fork or skewer these guys. So that gave black all the information he needed, and he just wins, knight e6. All right, probably white should play bishop to d2, but after queen takes b2, he's lost here as well. And in the game, he played queen to c1, knight f4, queen f4, and rook to d4. And that was it. Game over. So white, who's one of the best players in the world, a guy who's over 2,700, a guy who's strong enough to be second to the world chess champion, lost with the white pieces in just 18 moves. Very embarrassing, but again, it's not so much that he just made a one-move blunder as it is a series of problems kind of accumulated, and together they led to this dramatic collapse. So again, be very wary of tactical liabilities. And also, again, keep opponent's pieces restricted. That's generally a good idea. Okay, one last game, and this was one of the most important games in the tournament, frankly. This was played in the next to last round. Going into it, Carlsen and Nippon-Nishi were tied for first, and Nick Nakamura was just a point behind. So in this round, Nippon-Nishi lost to, who did he lose to? He lost to Aronian, and Carlsen won this game, and Nakamura also won his game. And then in the last round, all three players won, so Carlsen took clear first, a point ahead of both Nepomniachtchi and Nakamura. But had Carlsen lost this game, it would have been a three-way tie going into the last round, and who knows what the tiebreak situation would have been. So this game was played against Sergei Yudin, I think a young Russian grandmaster, maybe Ukrainian. No, I think Russian. Anyway, let's have a look. So Yudin had white. Again, Carlsen black. We're going to see this from black's point of view once more. And away we go. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. I should say about Yudin, he's a young guy, I think something like 18 years old, and he had an exceptionally strong second day. I think he had a streak at one point where he went something like 6.5 out of 7, just played fantastically well. I mean, beat just one super grandmaster after another. And, he was riding high at this point. So he wasn't quite, his score wasn't quite good enough to contend for first place, but he was definitely among the leading group. So d3, knight f6, knight b to d2, d6, c3, castles, castles. So very quiet here. Bishop e6, bishop b3, takes, rook b8, knight c4, queen d7. Maybe b5 would have been best here. So it's an idea that's kind of floating around, but only now did Carlsen play it, and it makes sense because here white cannot play knight to e3. So Carlsen was thinking very, very reasonably along strategic lines. The problem, though, is that this is a blunder, and Yudin missed it as well. So amazingly, both players missed a very, very simple tactic. Again, it's the kind of position where, if you gave this position to them with fresh eyes, or, certainly if it was put in a tactic book, they would solve it in nothing flat. White just plays knight c takes e5, says thank you for the pawn, and, okay, I mean, Carlsen is still Carlsen, but Yudin would have certainly great winning chances. I mean, you would expect him to beat most grandmasters the overwhelming percentage of the time. And, I think he would be a favorite against Carlsen even from here. So this would have been a complete disaster for Carlsen, blundering a pawn and having serious losing chances in just 12 moves. Instead, though, Yudin played knight c to d2. So the first lesson is clear that you can't let strategic aims lead you to forget about tactics. Tactics are always there in chess, even in the most innocent-looking positions. So bishop takes e3, f takes e3, knight e7. And here, white just forgot that he had an opponent. So the advantage that white can have in this position is the open f-file, or the half-open f-file, I should say. So that gives rise to a number of possibilities. You could have pressure with the rooks along the file. He could try to use f5 as an outpost. He might have some ambitions of sacrificing an exchange on f6, although, frankly, that doesn't look too plausible here, but it could be in the air depending on what other things happen over the next few moves. So reasonably, from the perspective of focusing on the f-file, he plays knight to h4. But here, Carlsen was alert and realized that this was not a very successful enterprise by white, and he played queen to g4. And here, Yudin should have just, as I like to say, apologized for his move and played the knight back to f3. And I think, as I mentioned in the previous video, sometimes when you make a mistake, you just have to acknowledge it and cut your losses and leave it at that and not try to chase. Or actually, I mentioned that. Yeah, no, I mentioned that in the first game that we looked at in this video from Amin against Anand, where Amin kept trying to force something in a position where he was worse, and ended up just losing just about immediately. So here too, the same sin was committed by Yudin. He should have played knight h to f3, but instead he plays knight f5. Okay, knight takes f5, rook takes f5, and what looks like more or less one-way traffic, looks like white's just going to play rook a to f1 and have some fun over on the king side. But the problem is queen to e2. And just a very simple double, well, not a double attack, a triple attack. So he's hitting d3, e3, and d2, and this basically is the end of the game already. So if he drops the d pawn, then his whole position just collapses. So he tried queen to c2, protecting the knight and the d pawn, and hoping, well, maybe it's not that bad. Queen e3 check, king over, and if knight to g4, well, let's look at this. So queen e3, king h1, knight g4, rook a to f1, and maybe, well, actually, no. I was going to say maybe he can get away just losing a pawn here, but that's not going to be true because I think just queen h6 threatens mate on h2 and threatens knight e3. So maybe white's just completely busted even here. But anyway, if there is any hope there, it didn't even arise because here Carlsen simply played knight to g4, and that just ends the game. So the threat is knight takes e3, forking the queen and the rook, but it's also queen takes e3 check, king h1, and knight to f2, winning the exchange, or forcing mate by a smothered mate. So this is just an utter disaster for the young grandmaster, and frankly a disaster for Carlsen's pursuers as well. So 5 moves before, Yudin could have obtained a very big advantage, just won a pawn for nothing, with a better position, and now he's resigning. And as a result, again, this was the margin of victory for Carlsen. So Yudin played great against the other players. I think he beat Nakamura, if I remember right, or at least I think he beat Nakamura, and he drew or beat Nepomniachtchi, while against Carlsen, he had a great chance and then just completely collapsed. All right, well, I hope these games were instructive in their own way, as well as being entertaining, and again, as I mentioned before, an occasion for a little bit of schadenfreude. So that's not an emotion that one should necessarily, savor too much and make a regular part of one's emotional diet, but every once in a while it's good for a little levity. And no one died here, so it's just some chess games. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this and learned something too. Anyway, I will see you next time with some more traditional games. Until then, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos signing off for ChessLecture.com. Bye-bye.